The first people who ran toward the burning jet were not firefighters. They were drivers, ordinary people on a Texas highway late at night, probably thinking about getting home or work or the road ahead of them. Then the sky changed. A private jet came down out of the darkness and crashed onto Loop 20 in Laredo. It hit the highway, struck a vehicle, and burst into flames for a few seconds. Nobody could have understood what they were seeing. This was not a runway. It was not an airport. It was not an empty field somewhere far from traffic. It was a public road. Headlights, stopped cars, broken metal, smoke rising into the night, and in the middle of it all, a business jet lying on the highway, burning. Then something happened that makes this crash feel different. People got out of their cars. They did not just stand back and film from a distance. They moved toward the wreckage, toward the smoke, toward the heat. Some grabbed whatever they could find. A sledgehammer, a shovel, their own hands. They tried to break through the cockpit window while flames were still rising from the aircraft. Because inside, people were still alive. The jet was a Cessna Citation Latitude, operated by NetJets, one of the biggest names in private aviation. It had taken off from San Jose del Cabo, Mexico, and was heading toward Austin, Texas. There were 6 people on board. For most of the flight, it may have felt routine. Private jets cross borders and cities every day. Passengers sit in quiet cabins. Pilots watch the instruments, and the world below becomes a pattern of lights. From inside the cabin, there may have been no reason to think the flight would end anywhere other than Austin. But as the aircraft approached South Texas, something went wrong. Authorities later said the crew reported mechanical problems and diverted toward Laredo International Airport. That detail is important because the plane was not simply falling from the sky without warning. The crew knew there was a problem. They were trying to get the aircraft safely onto the ground. Laredo International Airport was close, painfully close, close enough that in those final minutes, the runway may have felt reachable, but the jet never made it. Just before 10 o'clock at night, it came down onto Loop 20, only a few miles from the airport. For the people on that highway, there was no time to prepare. A normal road suddenly became the end of an emergency landing. The aircraft struck a passenger vehicle. The wreckage caught fire. Debris spread across the lanes. Traffic came to a stop as drivers stepped out into a scene that looked almost impossible. A plane crash is frightening anywhere, but a plane crash on a busy road feels especially unreal because it breaks the invisible rules we depend on. Planes belong in the sky or on runways. Cars belong on highways. When those two worlds collide, there is no clean way to understand it. Only noise, fire, smoke, and people trying to decide what to do before the moment is gone. Some of the bystanders moved closer. That decision is easy to admire from a distance, but hard to imagine up close. Fire tells your body to move away. Smoke makes it difficult to breathe. A crashed aircraft brings the fear of fuel, explosions, sharp metal, and heat. Every instinct says to stay back, but the people on that road could see movement. They could see there were people trapped inside, so they tried to reach them. Video from the scene showed bystanders working near the wreckage, trying to get through the cockpit area. Reports described people using tools to break glass and create an opening. It was chaotic, not clean or controlled. No one had time to organize the perfect rescue. Someone shouted, someone swung a tool, someone looked for a way inside, and all of it happened while the aircraft was burning. Emergency responders arrived and joined the rescue effort. Police officers, firefighters, and paramedics moved into a scene that was already dangerous and changing fast. The fire was active. The wreckage was unstable. Smoke filled the air. The crash had happened on a highway, surrounded by vehicles and people who had been caught in the middle of it. 5 Laredo police officers were later treated for smoke inhalation. That detail says a lot. It means the smoke was not just in the background. It was thick enough and dangerous enough to injure the people trying to help. This was not a simple extraction from a damaged vehicle. It was a burning aircraft on a road at night with survivors still inside. Somehow, 5 of the 6 people on board survived. They were taken to local hospitals along with the driver of the vehicle that had been struck. Reports later said the survivors were in stable condition. One person did not make it. Authorities did not immediately release the identity of the person who died, pending notification of family. And that is where the story becomes heavier than the footage, because for everyone watching online, the crash is a dramatic scene. For the families involved, it is something else entirely. It is a phone call in the middle of the night, a hospital room, a name being held back until loved ones are told, a flight that was supposed to end in Austin but ended on a highway in Laredo. After the flames were brought under control, the questions began. What happened to the aircraft? What mechanical problem did the crew report? How much time did they have? How close were they to the airport? And why did the jet come down before reaching the runway? The Federal Aviation Administration and the National Transportation Safety Board began investigating. That process can take months, sometimes longer, because investigators do not look for one quick answer. They look for a chain. They will study the flight path, the aircraft systems, maintenance records, air traffic communications, weather conditions, and the decisions made in the cockpit. In aviation accidents, the cause is often not one dramatic failure. It can be several small failures lining up, a warning at the wrong time, a system not responding the way it should, a crew making fast decisions under pressure, a runway close enough to see but too far to reach. That is why early reports need to be treated carefully. Mechanical problems were reported, but the final cause has not been determined. Still, the known timeline tells a frightening story. The jet leaves Mexico bound for Austin. Something goes wrong over South Texas. The crew diverts toward Laredo. The airport is nearby. Then, before the aircraft can land, it comes down onto a public highway. For the people on Loop 20, the technical details would not have mattered in that moment. They were not thinking about aircraft systems or investigation reports. They were looking at fire and people inside it. Imagine being the driver of the vehicle struck by the plane. A normal night, a normal road. Then, without warning, an aircraft enters the same space as traffic. That person survived and was taken to hospital. But surviving something like that does not make it ordinary. It is the kind of moment that can replay in someone's mind long after the road has reopened. The same is true for the bystanders. People often imagine emergencies as moments where courage appears clearly, but real emergencies are confusing. There is no script. No one tells you exactly what to do. You just see danger and you either move toward it or away from it. The people who helped that night chose to move closer, not because they knew it was safe, because they could not ignore the people inside. That is what makes the first few minutes after the crash so powerful. Before the road was secured, before investigators arrived, before statements were written and agencies began their work, there were strangers on a highway trying to break into a burning jet. No one driving that road expected to become part of an aviation rescue. They were not trained for that kind of scene. They did not know who was on board. They did not know how many people were inside or how badly they were hurt. They only knew someone needed help, and in that moment, that was enough. The crash also stands out because of the aircraft itself. A private jet carries a certain image: quiet luxury, speed, privacy, distance from ordinary life. It moves above highways, above traffic, above the world most people deal with every day. But on Loop 20, that separation disappeared. The aircraft came down into the middle of everyday life, not on a private runway, not behind airport fences, but onto asphalt, beside cars, in front of people who had no connection to the flight, until it suddenly became part of their night. That is why crashes like this feel so unsettling. They remind people that disasters do not always happen in isolated places. Sometimes they happen on the road in front of you, without warning, in a way that makes no sense until long after the first shock has passed. By the time the fire was out, The highway had become an investigation scene. Loop 20 was closed. Emergency crews worked through the night. The wreckage had to be preserved, examined, and eventually removed. Fuel and debris had to be contained. Investigators had to document the scene before traffic could return. For the city of Laredo, it was not just an aviation accident. It was a local emergency that unfolded in public on a road many people know and use. For NetJets, it became a crisis involving one of its aircraft. For federal investigators, it became a case that would be studied piece by piece. And for the people who stopped to help, it became a night they will probably never forget. There will be more questions in the days ahead. There may be a preliminary report. There may be more information about the mechanical problem. There may be more detail about the final communication with air traffic control, the condition of the aircraft, and the sequence that brought it down onto the highway. But those answers will come slowly. Aviation investigations are not built for speed, they are built for accuracy. And in this case, accuracy matters because one person is dead, several others were injured, and a jet ended up burning on a public road just short of an airport. The final technical explanation may take time, but the human part of the story began immediately. It began the moment drivers stopped their cars, the moment someone grabbed a tool, the moment strangers moved toward heat and smoke, because people inside the aircraft were still alive. That is the image that stays, not because it makes the tragedy smaller. It does not. One person still died. Families still suffered. Survivors still have to live with what happened. But in the first minutes after the crash, before anyone knew the full story, ordinary people made a choice that mattered. A jet was burning on a Texas highway, and strangers ran toward the flames.